Do we start whenever or? Yeah, shit. Okay. Hello. Hi, I'm Yiyi.
Hey everyone, I'm Jyro. Is this on? Am I miking?
I think
Yes,
so.
okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
We're going to try to talk loud. We've been told that the back of the room isn't going to hear us super great. So if you can't hear us super great, one, sorry, we'll try to talk louder. And two, feel free to scoot your way up or wave at me and be like, I can't hear you. We'll yell.
Never once has anyone done that when
Nope.
that was suggested.
No.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll be the first audience.
Yeah. So yeah, welcome to our talk, The Myth of the Solo Dev. We come from varied backgrounds. We both took somewhat meandering paths in game development, and we're here to share our experience as indie devs and people generally in the games industry.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of cover today this idea of the lone wolf developer. You've all heard of games that are made by one person, right? There's just one person in a dark room, right? So this is sort of the solo dev, right? This person sitting alone. Some context for both of us, like we said, we have different pathways. We've all worked at both worked at different sized game studios, worked on our own projects, worked on projects just the two of us, worked on projects with, studios that are like 50, 100 people. And there's a lot of the same pitfalls. We're going to go over that kind of happen. But when a lot of people picture a solo dev, this is what they're thinking, right? They're thinking, obviously maybe less hacker looking, but they're just thinking one person working by themselves. They're sitting in a dark room, coding, till early hours of the morning, doing all their own marketing and all their own programming and art and design, all those different facets that we all know go into making games.
Working in isolation, and then 5 years later, it's a hit.
Suddenly there's Terraria, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how it works. But actually, of course, that's not how it works, right? The reality of making games is that even if you are a solo developer, quotes, we're going to use quote solo developer a lot during this presentation, there is so much more to making a game than one person could ever do. And when you think about these games that were made by one person, that's, it's almost a bit misleading the way it's promoted. This is a solo developer game because they've needed feedback, right? At some point, they've showed this game to their friend. They've showed this game to a colleague. They've showed this game to their mom or to their dog, right? They've shown this game to somebody, and that person has given them information. At some point, they've needed help. They've needed to talk about marketing. They needed to talk about art. They've needed to talk about like, hey, I don't know how to figure out the Steam store because the upload process here is awful, right? They've needed help with those things.
And like beyond even just the technical aspects of game development, they needed probably support for their meat bodies. Yep. They needed to be out there. They needed social and emotional support. And those are all things that support the journey of game development that isn't really talked about when you think about the savant indie developer in their basement.
Yeah, I mean, you have logistical support, you have financial support. Even if they're not funding your game, your housemates that are buying you pizza when you're working really late are supporting you in a way, right? They're a part of that process. Anyone that you're talking about this game with, if you're a student, the people in your classes that you're running ideas across, they're not working on your game like an employee, but they are contributing to it. And it's like a super important part of that process. And inescapable, right? Like if you are truly working in isolation alone, if you're that dark figure that we showed in the first thing, I will probably never see your game because no one's going to see your game, right? Because you're not showing it to anyone. You're not out there. You're not getting that support. These are the first people that are your biggest advocates. They're your allies. They're the people that have been with you through that journey. They're your players, right? Like you need people to play your game. Play testing is so important. We have, E has started a community basically just for selfish playtesting reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, sometimes you just need a whole community built around playtesting your game that grows into something larger, right? And Kickstarter games are, certainly well known for something like that, right? Like these early access games, it's helped us get there. So we're going to talk about a lot of those and kind of what those pathways look like.
Yeah, so we are both part of an indie or a couple different indie game dev communities. We are both, I guess, primarily part of Gumbo Collective, which is New York City's largest collective of indie game developers. Arguably now the largest collective in the world. We're still fighting with Sweden on that one. And there's a lot of them out there. These are all collectives that contain indie developers who want the support of community members because they know they can't make a good game in isolation.
And these all pop up like sort of automagically. Like we work with each other now, but they kind of develop almost out of necessity because there's just a community. You know, we were talking about this one in Sweden, and it's just this rural community. It's a town of like 1,000 people, and there were some game developers living there, and they said, well, we would sure love to have some people to work on our games with us, to think about our games, to play test our games. These are all really, we need these things. And so they just started reaching out to other game developers around Sweden. And those other people were like, yeah, like we'll come, maybe do like a, you know, a weekend in your town or something like that. And like, you know, we'll give you some, maybe they have like a place for me to crash. And right. And now all of a sudden that kind of started growing and growing. And now that's happening regularly. And now they kind of, you know, pool their resources and they bought like a little studio space there for this collective. And it just kind of keeps growing. And that happens with places like Gumbo, where we are in New York City. It happens with places like Glitch City in LA. It happens with like the Tokyo indie collectives. This is every part of the world where games are being made, which is most parts of the world now. These things organically pop up, and it's because they have to exist. You can't get away from it. You can't get away from needing people to play test your game, needing other creatives to work with, needing people to keep you sane, other people to go, you know, like when you're working at 3 a.m. on your project that you've been working on for 2 years longer than you planned, when somebody else is next to you doing that and she's like, yeah, me too, you're like, okay, cool. Like, or there's other people doing this crazy thing.
And there are also the people who tell you when you're going in a completely wrong direction and you should probably think about pivoting, change your game entirely, or offer you work on something else that might be more viable or successful.
Yeah, a lot of these are also be how you will find work and games to work on and collaborators to make games with, which is also really important. Getting jobs and people to work on your project is great. And you can do sweat equity where like, I don't have money to pay you $1 million to work on my game, but like you need some programming help and I could really use some help with my marketing, and you do marketing and I do programming, and that's awesome, right? And now both those games are better, and it didn't cost anybody any money because you get to continue to work on what you really want to work on, and also you're helping this person in this community you built, and they're also just as invested in making your game and their game great, right? Like these are things that, again, keep happening around the world as games get developed, and it's not unique to games. You can see the same thing in film and other types of media, painting, everything, right? There's always collectives.
So yeah, these kinds of collectives sprout up through the concept of benevolent self-interest. Everyone who is a part of them isn't out there just to help others. It's not pure altruism. Everyone is in these communities because they want playtesting, they want feedback, they want marketing help, they want support from their community. And together, it's a really great thing. It's no one is vicious about it, but there definitely is a motivation and energy that is fueled by just wanting yourself to succeed. And by doing so, you also help others succeed.
And why this is relevant to solo devs is these are filled with solo devs, right? Yeah, this guy. So those are filled with solo devs. So Hyperlight Drifter kind of came out of one of these communities with a solo dev who did not work on a solo project.
Yeah. So Glitch City, we mentioned before, is one of the collectives out there. It's based out in Los Angeles, and it was started in part by Alex Presson, who is the founder of the studio that I work for, Heart Machine, best known for making Hyperlight Drifter. And back in the day, he was like an art student who was just working out of his garage and feeling demotivated and feeling unsure about like, how do I make a game? So in his garage, he started inviting other people in to help and collaborate with him and work on aspects of the game that he didn't know how to do, like art and certain design elements. He doesn't love programming, so he brought in some programmers. And from there, everyone sort of saw the value of being together in a space. And even if they were only working on their own projects, at least they were with other people going through the same thing and possibly could share troubleshooting or other tips. So Glitch City was born from Hyperlight Drifter's earliest days. And from there, it became an entity of its own because Hyperlight Drifter kind of took off. It was one of the most successful Kickstarter projects back in 2013 when Kickstarter actually meant anything. And so Hyperlight Drifter took off, and Glitch City became sort of an offshoot of that continued to support other development studios that were in the same phase of life as Drifter's early days.
And it's interesting too because so we'll talk about Hyperlight Breaker, which we're showing over in the hall. So some of you might have seen that. But one of the things when people come over, and you know, a lot of people had a big connection with something like Hyperlight Drifter, and they come over and they go, "This was made by one guy, right? This was just made by Alex." No, it wasn't, right? And again, this sort of this like almost lie that gets told where like Alex did this all himself and he set it up and he was working by himself into the late hours of the morning and did all this amazing work and he's so talented. And Alex does not want to do all of those things by himself. And, was fortunate enough to have communities like Glitch City to help with some of the early stuff with like, hey, I need some help with programming because I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And that's a totally valid thing. If he's a creative director. He cares about art direction and design and top level themes. He does not care about writing code. And so he was able to build a community that helped him fill in some of those gaps. And then when Hyperlight Drifter became more successful, he was able to hire to fill in those gaps. But again, it's almost this like fallacy where it's like now the team, when it was finished, was about 6 people. And so the game was made technically by 6 people, but also kind of by like 50 people, and also kind of by like hundreds and thousands of Kickstarter people that were playing their early versions and play testing and iterating. But it often gets labeled as like a solo dev game, right? And that's kind of not a malicious lie, but like an incidental lie where it gets told. And it's like Alex is the solo dev and he does everything by himself. And it's like, no. And if you want to make a game like Hyperlight Drifter, you need to do what Alex did, which is build those communities and have those connections and scale up and find a Kickstarter community and start a Discord and start a, that all happens through building community and bringing people in, not by sitting in your bedroom by yourself and saying, well, I know best, right? Like, I don't need any help. I'll figure it out. That's an important part of it, but you need that connection, that network.
Yeah, one of the most important tent poles, I think, of connecting with your community is the idea of transparency. Like, everyone knows that games have bugs. Everyone knows that game development doesn't just like fall out of your ass one day. And the more you can communicate with your potential player base and other people in your community, the more empathy you will build for your game and for your project, so that when it does come out, it can hopefully sell as well as Drifter did. But a lot of that is because the people who are early backers on the Kickstarter and early friends of Alex's and playtesters really believed in it and became stakeholders in the game through being engaged with the development process.
So some of you might have played Killer Queen. It's here today. There's about 6 cabinets of it. So I worked on Killer Queen for about 6 years. I was a lead developer on Killer Queen. And Killer Queen also is one of those things. It doesn't get branded as a solo dev game, but Nick Mikros and Josh DeBonis were the 2 people that came up with the original idea for Killer Queen. Actually started as a field game, for anyone that doesn't know. Played with foam swords and ball pit balls. And
wait, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Actually, MAGFest runs it some years. I've run it here at MAGFest. But yeah, it was originally started as a come out and play game. And so basically come out and play is a physical, like, meet space in a field, you play games. And it was a fun field game. And then they were like, as game developers, they're like, I want to work on this longer than I should. I can't just leave this as a small field game. I need to make this into a video game and do a whole bunch of content with it. And so they made a simple video game. Charles Pratt from NYU, they run an event called No Quarter, which is for arcade games, challenged them to make this little experimental 6v6 at the time game into a arcade cabinet. And so they did that, right? And so I actually joined the team right around when we were making it into the arcade cabinet. So there's some good pictures of me at NYU inside the cabinet soldering things because everything fell apart, the day of the launch, because of course it did, right? But so what Killer Queen is, this is often labeled as like a 2-person job, right? So Josh and Nick, their names are on the marquees. People know them in the community. If any of you play Killer Queen, you've probably heard of Josh and Nick in some capacity. And again, it's one of those things where people say like, wow, Josh and Nick, maybe not solo devs, but these 2 guys, right? They did everything. And from, knowing, being there again from pretty early on, before it was an actual, playable game in a cabinet, which is what it's known for now, that's never been the case. Josh and Nick very much thought of a lot of the ideas. Josh and Nick at the very beginning were doing the initial prototyping. They brought me in because they needed help with the programming and the engineering, right? Like, which is, again, of course, as soon as they were like, hey, we need help to scale this up, we need to bring in people from the community, right? And before that, though, the thing about this was that it was community driven, right? Like, the reason that Charles Pratt from NYU challenged them to do this is because he thought it was cool. They'd been bringing it to NYU playtest nights and demoing the game, because it was a weird 6v6 game. Like, what an odd, they used to play with like little NES controllers before it was an arcade cabinet, right? So it was this weird esoteric pixel art team strategy 3 ways to win game. And Charles was just like, this is fucking awesome, right? Like, this is so cool. And the students thought it was so cool. And the staff thought it was so cool. And that didn't happen because they sat in their bedrooms thinking of how they can mastermind this into the best thing ever. That happened because they brought it out. They showed it to a community. They found a community that was excited about it. And then when they made it into this first arcade cabinet, one-off arcade cabinet, Killer Queen was never designed to be a commercial game. The original arcade cabinet is still at NYU. There's no coin machine doors. There's no cup holders. There's no marquee lights really or anything like that. It's barely hangs in there, right? It's still, it's held together with hopes and dreams. And that's because in order to get that first version out there and see if people even liked it, they needed to get it out there. They needed to get feedback. They needed to do a one-off hand-cut version of this arcade cabinet, on a way too low of a budget for making an arcade machine. And the community is what this slide says, the smaller team, the more important the community. You can't test a 10-player game with 2 developers, right? Like you can literally not play Killer Queen properly without 10 people. And so how do you do that? You need a community. And it means you need to reach out to your community early and often and constantly, like constantly.
So yeah, going back to the idea of that lone wolf solo developer, building in isolation is just, it's dumb, is the thesis of this talk. Like, you should not try to be that savant, isolated solo developer if you want to have a successful game. I'm not saying it's impossible, but why would you? Why would you not use all the resources that you have at your disposal?
One of the theses is we want to get, what was the term we always use? It was the altruistic...
benevolent self-interest.
Benevolent self-interest, right?
Yes.
Benevolent self-interest. We have a few different words, but we really try to push this idea when we talk to new developers, especially about benevolent self-interest, which is that you should be a bit greedy when you're making games, when you're making art in general. And that sounds a little counterintuitive to building community, but like, functioning good communities are based on being just a little bit greedy. Not in that you're trying to take things from other people, but in that you want something for yourself. You want playtesters. You need 10 people to play your game to test Killer Queen. You need a community to advocate for your Kickstarter so that it can go viral. You need these things to be successful, but you're not taking them and giving nothing back. You're contributing your resources as well, right? So your benevolence is like, well, I'll help you with your programming, but I know that you have a big Twitter following, so can you post about my game and like maybe do some promo images for it, right? You're really getting something you want, right? Like, both partners, like in that agreement, are kind of greedy. They're both like, well, I don't want to do programming. They're like, well, I don't want to do marketing, right? And it ends up being a really good partnership, right? Nobody's like donating anything there. Nobody's giving anything up for free. Nobody's working alone or trying to solve all these problems themselves. You kind of have to push this idea of, I need something, and the best way to get it is by immersing myself in a community where other people also need stuff, and maybe I have that stuff, and they have the stuff that I need.
It just helps you spread the load. Going back to what we talked about, Gumbo Collective, which is New York City's largest collective of indie game devs, we have now a meetup community of like 3,000-ish people, and that meetup group was started when I was making a game back in 2015, and I was like, well, I'm going to need playtesters for this game eventually. So I started building a group of playtesters to co-work and test each other's stuff well before I even had a game. And we met monthly, and then eventually we met like bi-monthly and then weekly, and it really grew to a very large and active community. I ended up scrapping that game. It was garbage, but the community stayed and has grown, and it's become this like very vibrant resource for the city.
And then that meetup community eventually again became Gumbo's official meetup page, right? And so and then you also took over a few other delinquent meetup pages that were like playtest communities. And so again, it was really greed, right? Like, now Gumbo is formed and we needed a meetup page. Well, we have a member that has a meetup page with like several hundred people, and a few other meetup pages that maybe have a few hundred people. So, and they're happy because their pages were not being used or underutilized. The EE's community was happy to have access now to Gumbo because this is a bigger playtest network, right? And so Gumbo, the collective, got to be greedy. Us as individuals got to be greedy because I want those playtesters, right? And the playtesters got to be greedy because they got to be like, well, I want more games to playtest, and I want people to playtest my games, right? Like, Gumbo does a weekly meetup. That's awesome. Gumbo does a weekly board game, and or bi-weekly board game, weekly. We do like multiple playtests of both tabletop games and digital games every month, and that's so great for those people in those communities and those meetups because that's what they wanted, right? That's where they joined that because they want to either play experimental games or they're looking for people to play their experimental game. And so again, everyone there gets to be a little selfish about what they want, and it comes together because now we have a strong community. And again, all of those people, by and large, solo devs.
Let's take it back to what happens when you don't do those things, when you don't engage with players early on. Solar Ash was our sophomore title at Heart Machine. We were published by Annapurna, which was kind of a big deal. We're like, woo, we didn't have to do like a whole Kickstarter thing. And
going from Kickstarter to Annapurna is quite the upgrade.
And Annapurna was just like, here, have some money for 5 years and build us a game. And we did. And because the team was so exhausted from doing the whole Kickstarter thing and doing all the community engagement and back and forth and feedback cycles and rapid iteration, they were like, cool, we have 5 years worth of money. Let's just sit and spend it and make a really good game. And that was a bit of a mistake. We worked in a vacuum. There was not really a lot heard about Solar Ash, even from diehard Hyperlight Drifter fans. Like a lot of people didn't know that we were even working on a game because it was all heads down working for 5 years. And yeah, in those 5 years, we divested a bit from community and didn't try to be in the public eye, didn't try to talk to people, and ultimately it really hurt our sales, it hurt our growth, and the game came out and it was lovely, but it nowhere near touched the numbers that Drifter made.
One of the interesting things about doing the Hyperlight Breaker booth, I get to help EE and the Heart Machine team out a lot there, is people come by and they're like, oh, is this a sequel to Hyperlight Drifter? And I'm,
it's not a sequel.
It's not a sequel, it's a spiritual successor, pre-sequel. But so we say yes. The short answer is like yes, this is. And then they're like, oh, like I didn't know you guys are working on it. I heard about this and blah blah. I'm like, have you played our second game, right? Because Solar Ash, sort of the technology stack and a lot of the team was built for Solar Ash is being used for Hyperlight Breaker, of course, right? So the same game engine, a lot of the same physics, some of the same art direction, and a lot of the same developers. And I'm like, have you played Solar Ash? And they're like, what's that? And in the same voice, these people go, Hyperlight Drifter is my favorite game. I love it so much. It's a personal story for me. I remember when it came out. I supported the Kickstarter. I love you guys so much. This is my favorite game. You made a second game? And like, wow, what a mistake, right? To not connect with those people. Those people come over and say, I love your company so much that it's my favorite game ever, but don't know we made a second game, right? And that's because the people that we loved, that were our community, these are the people that will, if we say we're working on a game, right? If Heart Machine says they're working on a game, they'll like yell it for Heart Machine over and over and over again. If they knew about that game, they would have been promoting it. They would have been putting it every day, following all the updates, telling their friends about it. But instead, because of building in isolation, they still don't know it exists. Like they still come over to this booth and they go, what's this? Is this like a different company? And it's like, well, no, this is your favorite company's game, We as developers in the 5 years of Solar Ash's development didn't really give our like diehard fans and evangelists the tools they needed to help support the marketing and growth of this game. So we're trying to remedy that going forward, and we'll talk about that later. All right. So after working at Bumbleware on Killer Queen, my next job was at AIM Lab, which has been renamed. Actually, it's AIM Labs now. They're trying to figure out what their name is. Nobody knows what to call it. AIM Lab is an esports first-person shooter trainer. It is fundamentally designed for people that play games like Valorant and Counter-Strike and Apex Legends to get better at clicking on heads to win games, right? That's the main thing that they do. And fundamentally, this was started by one person, solo dev again. But this person managed to be a very charismatic, confident white man and pitch to a lot of VCs and get a bunch of money. So AIM Lab ended up raising about $100 million. Off of what is essentially a kind of janky pre-alpha click-on spheres in a grid. So good for him. And of course, though, with the money, which is almost, you'll notice there's a kind of congruency here, which is getting a bunch of money all at once is a great windfall and often a bit of a plague in some ways. The core community that was excited about AIM Lab, they fundamentally wanted to play something called Six Shot or Grid Shot. And that is, Grid Shot is the most popular AIM trainer. It is a grid of 9 balls, 3x3, and they kind of pop up in random places, and you hover over them, you mouse over them like a first-person shooter, and you click on it. More grid shot is played than anything else, and that is still true today. But AimLab, when they got all this money, they decided they needed to partner with everybody and everything and every technology stack, because now they had $100 million and they kind of needed to spend it. And so instead of asking their community, how do we spend it? Now, AimLab is doing okay as a company. I was involved in a layoff there where they fired the entire North American team because they were not doing so okay as a company. So that gives you some idea of how spending $100 million actually ends up, right? Like, oops, we have to fire 50 engineers. But yeah, I mean, like all the logos up here, they are experiments that AimLab has tried to run without asking if anyone wants them to run these experiments. So they're like, oh, look, we're going to like create these scenarios where like you can play out from your favorite esports gaming moments, like reenact playing as Scream in the Counter-Strike finals and play what he would play. Who asked for this? Like who asked for this experience? Nobody wanted it. They want to play grid shot. They want to click on 9 balls in a grid. That's all they want to do. And they're like, well, okay, what about AimLab's partner with Astralis for like more merch? And they're like, merch for my clicking on 9 balls in a grid? Like, what are we doing here, right? They partnered with Arcane, and when I worked there, I was involved in like an Arcane activation where we did like a partnership with Arcane for like, why? I don't know. Arcane's a TV show. Why is it in a first-person shooter aim trainer? We need to partner with everybody on everything, right? Like we have connections at Riot, and Riot's just advertising heavily, and they're like, sure, you want to pay us a bunch of money to use our logo? Okay, we have $100 million. We'll pay anyone for anything. You can see the big, generative AI for gaming. 9 balls in a grid. Generative AI, we better have it. Got to get it in there because that's the buzzword. We want to raise more money, and no one asked for this. Not a soul in the world was like, damn, I wish my esports aim trainer had generative AI. What do they even generate? I genuinely don't know. They partner with
Generating
TikTok.
balls.
There's a TikTok app for your aim training. Anyone want to do esports training on TikTok? You can. Why, right? And so AimLab is fortunate enough that they raised $100 million, which means you can kind of like fuck off $50 million worth of it, right? But they still spent a tremendous amount of money and had to lay off a huge amount of employees because they're not listening to their community. Their community just wanted like more options, better optimizations, maybe some like better scenarios, maybe like some, different visual effects and stuff like that, support for different platforms, Linux support, stuff like that, right? That's what their community wants. They don't want generative AI in their esports game trainer.
So yeah, what does this have to do with indie developers? The two examples we raised of Solar Ash published by Annapurna and AIM Labs having $100 million, those are companies with big money and big resources, and yet they did not do as well as an indie developer just doing their own thing and accessing their communities and the real people who are actually going to utilize and buy those products. So we struggled. We struggled with Solar Ash, and it sounds like with the layoffs and such, AIM Labs struggled as well.
And I think the big takeaway here is that these are companies that have access to kind of whatever they want, right? Like with the check from Annapurna or VC funding, you can hire every analyst, you can hire the best engineers, you can hire art directions, you can pay to be on every TV show or every Twitter feed, every AMA on Reddit. You can be anywhere you want with $100 million. And they were, right? And you
can't pay for people to give a shit.
Yeah, you can't pay for people to like your game. You can't pay for a personal emotional investment. And the big learning is that if these companies with, $100 million, right? Like more money than I don't know your personal wealth, but certainly than me and my friends all have cumulatively, right? Like I suspect none of you have $100 million, right? If they can't do it with $100 million, how are you going to do it with your budget as an indie developer? How are you going to work in isolation and say, well, I know better, right? I don't need playtesters. I don't need a community. I don't need to reach out to my friends. I don't need to, build with the people around me and the people that like my game, because you can't even buy it. So you definitely can't wing it if you don't have $100 million. If you're, and have a publisher like Annapurna who is still going to put your game on like, the Game Awards, right? Is still going to run commercials. Is still going to like promote. Annapurna has a big following. They do like a big, Twitch stream every year with all their games. So like Solar Ash, still got out there, right? And same thing with AimLab. With $100 million, we can partner with Astralis and Arcane and get our name out there, right? but that still didn't translate into like how much money was spent and how much time was spent to actually people playing the game. And that's kind of what most people really care about.
Especially as developers. Like,
Yeah.
we don't care about Jeff Keighley. We care about like all of you playing Hyper Light
I don't need Matt Damon to tell me how great my game is. I want you guys to tell me how great my game is, you know?
Yeah. So Hyper Light Breaker, we're here showing it out in the indie section. And here we decided to return to the roots of Hyper Light Drifter and re-engage from very early on with our community and try to be with them throughout our journey. This time we do have publisher support. We had a pretty convoluted path to publisher support because our publisher got acquired and then sold, and it was a big mess. But we had money behind it. But we decided not to develop in isolation. We decided to do the extra work and continue to talk to our community and get feedback and get early engagement, both channeling the early adopters and lovers of Hyper Light Drifter, as well as new players who like open world, procedurally generated online co-op multiplayer buzzword soup. And because we're out there and we're talking to people, one of our people here is Sean. He's one of our best Drifter supporters. He runs all our subreddits and our Discords and everything. It's amazing. And we're talking to people like Sean again, and it makes us feel like we're less isolated. It becomes a lot less spooky when you can continue to talk to players and be like, hey, does this make sense? Does this feel good? Just last night I talked to Sean and another person at our booth about like, does this parry mechanic feel good to you? And the answer was basically no, so we're going to change that. And because of those just one-on-one or small interactions, we believe that we will make a better game that will make better numbers and overall be a more satisfying experience.
Being in a place like MAGFest, I think, speaks much more to the real audience that Hyper Light Drifter captured and the audience that solo developers, people that care about the creative aspect and the personal pride and project aspect of game development than an advertisement on, the Game Awards ever could, right? All of you that get the chance to play Hyper Light Breaker get the chance to experience it firsthand, really help us play test it, iterate. There are people from the team that are here that are directly able to hear your feedback and relay it. And all that's listened to, right? And also now all of you know this game exists, which wouldn't have been said for Solar Ash, right? And that's already a huge starting point. We're a room full of people, and hopefully, at least a good chunk of a convention full of people know it's there because they're out there in the community, right? Like MAGFest is also another one of these intentional communities. I'm sure many of you really like being here and really connect with being here. And, certainly we do. And the people that show games here do. And that's very personal, right? That's, again, one of those things that's hard to buy. You can't just like pay for an advertisement and get people to actually care about your game. So after getting laid off from AIM Lab, I actually worked in, you'll see there's a few arrows here. So what we're going to go over in a few slides is kind of how things change. So I started at a company called Battlefly, which was making games. And it was making, apologies to you that don't love it, there's some Web3 component to our games, Web3 gaming. What I love about these is it's also very community driven, right? Like this is a place where I joined because I really liked the aspect of building with the community. It is a place where people have a sense of ownership, and we're trying to, when I was working there, do it in like sort of an ethical way. But one of the weird things about that, again, though, is that like it's sort of the exact opposite. I was so burnt out on like AIM Lab that like even like Web3 and crypto, which, I'm not as averse to as some people, but like that felt so much more connected with the community than something like AIM Lab, where I was just working as an engineer, not talking to the community, not getting to reach out. I was like, damn, dude, like I want to talk to anybody in a community. Like I want people that actually care about what I'm doing. And there are a lot of small games. This is like, we're at Battlefly, we're not some big, massive funded studio. There was 6 of us just making a game for a very intentional small community. And that was really cool. But one of the other weird things about making games is that whether they are changes to the parry mechanic or changes to the entire core structure of the company, if you really work with your community, you end up sometimes in weird places. And so I'll kind of go through this daisy chain of how Battlefly became PlayFi, became a company called Lyft, which is where I'm technically the gaming lead now, which is an infrastructure company that actually doesn't have that much to do with games. It's one of the roles that I serve as an advisor on right now. So we'll get into that. But listening to your community, super important to being able to make these transitions, because if we just thought we knew better, we'd still be doing Battlefly and we would not have a community left and we would not have any money.
So yeah, we are advocating for it being okay to be wrong. Just get okay with being wrong, because solo developers, the ones that like sit alone in their basement, they think they know everything. They think their game is hot shit and everybody else will love it as soon as it's out, as soon as it's perfect. All they need to do is build a good product and the people will come. And that is just not correct. That will often lead to years of work and grind on something that never gets played by anyone. And we're here to say that you need people. You need people around you in order to help you refine your project, or just tell you to kill your baby.
And what that means is that you're going to get a lot of feedback. You're going to get a lot of suggestions. You're going to get a lot of opinions. You're going to see some of those opinions shortly. But you have to be responsive and reactive. We put politely there because, it is a dialogue with these communities. People are going to have strong opinions. And that is a real blessing and a real curse. Sometimes strong opinions come across with a lot of vitriol, and sometimes they come across with a lot of love. And sometimes those are very hard to distinguish from each other. But that's wonderful. Like, how amazing to have a community that cares so much about your game, right? That they can sit there and be like, you've ruined what I love about your game, right? Like, oh, what a delightful thing to tell me. Thank you so much. Like, I'm so happy to hear that, because that means that you care, right? Like, there are so many things, so many art pieces that I don't care about. When I walk through a museum, 90% of the art I don't connect with. I just don't think about it. I'm sure it's the same for all of you guys. Most art you see, most games you play, they're fine, right? Like, I'm sure all of you think something about the Mona Lisa. It's right. It's fine, right? You know about it. But there's a bunch of other things near the Mona Lisa that you couldn't name and don't even think about, right? And to have somebody walk up and be like, you've ruined my art that I love, right? Or you've made my art better that I love. Or I have so many opinions that you need to hear about the art that you make that I love. And they'll tell you. That's so much better than the Solar Ash experience or the AIM Lab experience, where people don't know your art exists or are kind of just like, bro, what are you doing? Like, what's happening here? And so being wrong is the important part of that, right? Like, because every one of those people, they might be wrong. You might be wrong. You're probably both wrong, right? There's probably something in between that's a truth where you have to kind of interpret. Like, if somebody says, I hate the parry mechanic, here's how to fix it. What you need to take is like, there's something that's not connecting about this mechanic, right? And I need to work on it. And you need to be brave enough to look at your own work and say, but I love the parry mechanic. But if everyone hates the parry mechanic, it's time to change the parry mechanic. And that's a bit more about game dev. But the important part there is that if you're a solo developer working in isolation, you just sit there loving that parry mechanic. You think it's great. You think it's the most clever parry mechanic you've ever made. You're sitting there, you're playing, testing your own game. You're like, these menus are great. My tutorial's perfect. My parry mechanic is awesome. Everyone's going to love this. And if you don't play test that whole time, you're going to be 2 years into development, show to somebody for the first time. They're like, I don't get it. And that's like the worst thing, right? The best thing you want to hear is like, oh, I love your game and I hate what you've done, or I love your game and here's my suggestions, or I love your game and let's do more of it. But the worst thing is like just one of those, paintings no one cares about in the museum. They look at it and they go, yeah, I don't get it. I don't understand.
Anything is better than apathy in art. So yeah.
Okay. So
there you go.
Yeah, let's talk about what that feedback looks like. So going from Battlefly, this is a vote that we did. I won't dig into the logistics of this, but essentially one of the weird things about being in the Web3 space is that people own the company, right? Like we're a decentralized autonomous organization. The short of what that means is that like people own assets, tokens that they can vote on, kind of like stock shareholders a bit. And so what they can say is like, this is how we want to change the direction of the game. This is how we want to spend our community resources collectively. And so we were making Battlefly games. We actually made 3 games. We made a auto battler game, a drafting game, and then a auto runner game. So we made 3 different games, and people liked them. They did well. I worked there for about 2 years, and they were fun. They were cool games, but people kind of got bored of them. They weren't games that had like some huge, life cycle that was designed to last 10 years. They were games that people were going to play and then move on from, and that's great. And then we were looking and we said, well, the market's kind of changing a little bit around our economy. The games industry is a little, over the last year. People aren't spending as much, in the same way on games. And Web3 is a bit of especially now, this is a year ago, but like Web3 is getting increasingly, right, So we were like, do we just want to make another game, right? Do we want to make another like game with a crypto component? It was certainly something we could do. We had the team for it, the experience for it. Or do we want to do something different, right? And so what we did is we asked our community and we said, do you want us to make another game? Or do you want us to pivot? Do you want us to do something different? And we really left it up to them. This is an actual vote that we put up on a website called Snapshot where you can vote with those tokens. And you can see in the top right, we asked, we said, do you want us to make another game or do you want us to start making games infrastructure? And they said, we want you to make games infrastructure. We think as a community, this is what we're best equipped for. We want to help playtest these things. We have partners of other games that we work with, people that we know that we think would value from the infrastructure that you guys have built for your games. So instead of just trying to take our stuff that we built and cram it in to get another game, we decided we're going to take our stuff that we built and put it into other people's games and build those community connections. And so not only one, could this not happen without the community, because we need them to bring the games. They need them to bring the community. We need them to bring the partners. But we literally, if they said no, we could not do it. They would not give us the money to do it. They would, it was almost a Kickstarter that way, where they decided, do we want to do this?
And you had enough people who gave enough of a shit to vote at all to help you decide the trajectory of your company.
Right. Yeah. And people that came in, and this wasn't you're seeing the end result, but this was months of Discord discussion with strong opinions. Some people were furious, right? Like, I bought into a gaming company. How dare you, right? And some people were like, this is genius. You guys are genius. We love you, right? And both those people are wrong. Like angry people are wrong. People that think it's a good idea are wrong. Like, we don't really know if it's a good idea. That's why we're asking for help. And then so a weird thing here is that we started developing this. You can go to press next. We started developing this. So the company is called Lyft now. And we don't make games at all. We have very little to do with games. And we were originally called PlayFi. And so we, pivoted from Battlefy to PlayFi because we thought we were going to make games infrastructure. We were going to use essentially take real-time data from games. So almost like an analytics tool that would use some like AI components, not generative AI, like small machine learning AI. So machine learning to essentially go through games and pull out relevant data and help with analytics and player tracking, all that kind of stuff, because we were using that internally. And when we started reaching out to those partners from our community, people that, connected us, it turns out that people didn't want to use it for games. People wanted to use it for all kinds of other stuff. Some of our biggest people that we're working with right now are actually cybersecurity companies that want to use this to monitor things like their security cameras and their data flows and traffics and stuff like that. It is partners that want to use this for rich analytics on other behaviors, everything from markets to real-time content. And specifically, our biggest partners are actually streamers, content creators that want to essentially have richer data about who's watching their stream, what are they doing, how can they connect with them, people that want to advertise with streamers. And we didn't see this vertical at all. We called our company PlayFi because we're for games. And then about 6 months out, we didn't have any gaming partners really. And we had 3 streaming partners. And we're like, well, do you guys want to change the name again? And they were like, yeah, I guess we're pivoting again. And so now our community is called Lyft. And there have been people that have stayed with us that whole time. And again, they're our strongest advocates. They're the people that bring us those partnerships, right? Because we don't have the resources to do it ourselves. We're still less than a 10-person team.
Yeah, going back a bit to the museum and the Mona Lisa and stuff, and the idea that apathy is the thing that will kill your game. Passionate love or hatred of your game will keep it alive. And we sure got a lot of passionate hatred when our game released in early access about a week and a half ago. So Hyperlight Breaker was highly anticipated. It was all over IGN, all over the front pages, all over everything. We were #1 Steam sales on our first day. And then people started playing it and they were like, this is crap. You have ruined Hyperlight Drifter. You've ruined the universe that I was deeply in love with. And it was a bit of a catastrophe. So we could have just rolled over and said well, we got our Arc Games Gearbox money. We'll just take that and run. But instead we're going back to how Drifter started, which was Alex alone in his garage and talking to his friend and being like, hey, help me. what do I do? These people are angry. This isn't working. How do I fix this? And in that same with that same energy, I have been going through all of the reviews, all of the Steam forums, all of the Discord discussions, basically one by one, responding to everybody, being like, okay, you hate the med kits. I hear you. We're going to fix that. And so our first couple hot fixes, like, basically immediately addressed everyone's major concerns with the game. And we started out day one with a Steam review score of like 30% positive, which is just horrible. But in the last week, we've raised it now to 62 because we pushed out 2 hot fixes, and we anticipate continuing to grow that number once our first like major content drop comes out. And all of that is because our background is in grassroots community building and listening to our audience and recognizing that we are doing an early access game for a reason. We are here to hear feedback, get people's opinions, get your input, and make the game what people want to play.
And so, I mean, you can look at the date on this. This is during MAGFest. This came out yesterday, day before, right?
Before,
like
yeah.
day before. So like these are
And the
now.
Gaylord internet was not my friend.
So this just constantly coming, and I think again though, this also comes back to that transparency component, right? Like a lot of games will try to, you know, the big studios will try to like hide their bad reviews or like downplay them or like spend more money to increase their reviews or do a big media splash to try and like get people to play, you know, Jedi Fallen Order, even though it's optimized like shit or whatever. Like, oh, mixed reviews, doesn't matter. We'll just keep paying them for advertisements, right? And that's an option. You can do that, and you can still have mixed reviews like a year later on Steam, like that game does. Or you can listen to your community, and I watch EE write these reviews sometimes, and you know, respond to these reviews, and some of them are nice and loving, and still negative. Some of them are nice and loving and positive technically, like it's a thumbs up, but not necessarily so positive. And some of them are just fucking not nice people. They're not nice people, and they say not nice things.
But yeah, part of our like big turnaround from like 30 to 62% was because of responding to those reviews one by one and making our community feel heard and feel like their input matters, because it really, really does. And people actually change their reviews, which is almost unheard of in games. Like people being convinced on the internet that their original opinion was wrong.
Yeah.
Like amazing. So yeah, we're working really hard on that. And part of that, again, is having conversations one-on-one with people like Sean, being like, how do we fix this? People hate this. How do I fix it? And yeah, we're just going to keep doing that. And again, this is a lesson that any solo developer can take along with them, because you'll probably not always get stellar feedback. It's all about how you respond to it. The
first trailer you post on Twitter of your solo game is going to receive, if you're lucky, a bunch of mixed reviews, a bunch of people having strong opinions either way. And if you're average, a few friends will look at it, right? And you just need to keep putting out content and keep creating. And that's not just about marketing, but that's just about building that community. You need to get that. But sometimes your 32%, you might actually have a really brilliant game off the gate, but your 32% is more reflective of like that nobody knows about it or nobody's playing it. Or you're not connecting with the right audience, right? And that's part of Heart Machine with Breakers thing as well, right? Is like they're trying to convince an existing audience as well as capture a new audience, and like you need to be receptive, you need to talk to them. And as a solo developer, even more important, right? Like ever more important, because you don't even have the luxury of spending, you know, Gearbox or Arc or whatever they're called now is money, or, you know, having like a crypto component that lets you monetize things. Like you're probably funding this yourself, right? If you're a solo developer. And like you want to get to that point, honestly, where you have the luxury and the grace of getting yelled at about how they've ruined the game with the latest patch. Like how delightful for somebody to go, I've played this for 20 hours and the latest patch is fucking awful. Yes. Thank you so much. Like, thank you for those 20 hours. Like seriously, what a gift. And also I hear you. And also maybe you're wrong, right? Like maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're wrong. We'll figure that out. We'll workshop that. But like, if you don't put it out there and if you don't build that community, you don't even find out. So conclusion is solo developers, there's no solo developer. It doesn't exist. And the best developers of any size are ones that work with their audience and work with their communities and try to stay true to their vision, but also tailor their game to something that makes sense for the players that they want to be playing it. yeah, if you want to be a solo developer, I would drop that idea a bit from your head and start thinking of yourself as like a developer of the community, a community of other developers, a community of colleagues, a community of friends, your family, your potential fans, your audience, and start connecting with them right away. Because $100 million companies need to do it, and $0 companies need to do it. And we've worked with, through Gumbo, through our various career choices, again, everything from Web3 to $100 million companies to traditional funded, publisher funded to, working on $1,000 game jam startup games that we've done ourselves, right? And so you need to do it, right? You need to do that outreach. So I think our next slide is just if you guys have any questions for us, we would love to answer them.
I saw a question. Yes.
So, for context, a couple of tiny solo developers I follow, Spot, who made Start Time, and Heather Flowers, who made Snake Farm, have started putting out an email newsletter as a way of reaching their community. And I'm curious, who should use a newsletter? That seems like a very old school way of doing things, but I can see the benefit as like a guy who follows the kind of game. Should every company have a newsletter, or is this for like getting your foot in the door?
I do think if you could tolerate it, just have as many touch points with everyone as possible. Like, email newsletter is great. It's a way to directly get into people's inbox and they can click through and get straight to your Steam page. I hate Twitter right now because, whatever's happening, but I have to be on Twitter because that's where the players are. I love Blue Sky and that's where the community is and that's where like fellow devs are and it's all very cozy and nice, but ultimately I want to be selling to all the people on Twitter. So as much as you can tolerate, I would say do all the things.
I would also say run experiments, right? So you don't have to hard commit to running a newsletter for the next 10 years. You can run a newsletter and see what the response is, right? See how many people sign up for it. If you say, we have a newsletter, it's going to go out, and you put out the first one, and there's 10 people on your mailing list. And by the second one, you have 15 people on your mailing list, right? Maybe that's not the avenue you're going to connect to your audience from, right? Maybe your audience lives on Reddit. Maybe your audience lives in Discord. Maybe your audience lives in a physical space if it's an arcade game, right? So run an experiment, do a newsletter one day, keep it a single pager, spend, a few hours on it, and then do one more and see if you're getting the traction you need. And I think anyone can run any of those experiments, whether it's on social media or a newsletter or, a trailer, whatever.
Chopper hat.
I was just asked, like, a question around if you guys were starting over at the very, very beginning of, like, you haven't even entered into the industry yet, and you want to give some advice back to yourself of like entering into the industry X, Y, Z, whether or not it's solo or partnering, I was wondering what kind of advice you would give yourself from that perspective.
I have the luxury, I work in education as well. It's part of my creative technology job here. We didn't touch on it, but I work with a lot of students and a lot of like from 6 to about like 16 in educational things around New York City. And so I get the luxury of giving that advice to myself, students that are up and coming and doing gaming pathways a lot. It's to be very flexible as you're entering into it. You don't necessarily know exactly what role you're going to end up in, what you're going to really enjoy about it. You may think about yourself as a programmer, but it turns out you actually really like more of the production aspects, or, there's a game engine you end up doing that you didn't think about, or, you work at a 3-person studio and suddenly you're the best person for making the trailers, right? And so maybe you end up in trailers. And so, try not to silo yourself off too hard early on. Try to touch a lot of different things and also be flexible to taking jobs. Like, take jobs early. My first job that I got was working for a company called Soft, and they were trying to make a game called Merryweather. You've never heard of it. You never will. And the work I was doing was client work for people that wanted to make games, and they were bad ideas. And I got paid $15 an hour, and that led to my job at Bumble Bear, where I was working on Killer Queen. And it was, like 3 years between those things of working at this, but I met Josh DeBonis through that and moved in, right? So like just taking those jobs, right? Like, set your ethics standards where they are, but take the weird jobs, take the awkward jobs, take a job that you might not think you're a perfect fit for, put yourself out there because, you never know exactly what you're going to work in as your final thing or what the connections you make. 2 months of job experience, wherever it is worth more than 4 years of school.
I totally agree with the take as many jobs as possible and be ready for the industry to be pretty brutal at the start. So that would be my advice to myself from when I was first starting out. And the other thing is just really, regardless of what jobs you take, because you are going to probably deal with some garbage, invest more in your personal branding and how you sell yourself and how you present yourself. So I currently regret like my social media profiles being all over the place. I'm like Zhang on Blue Sky, but then I'm Ilanthus on Twitter, and I have like 4 different Instagram accounts all under different names, and it makes it very hard for me to have an identity that people can easily digest on a resume or on 5 minutes in a profile. So yeah, invest in that. Invest in yourself and how you present yourself and how you talk about yourself and pitch yourself. Oh, the math there.
You talked about kind of blurring the line from who's the developer working on the game and who's something. So with like collective, it might be blurring who's in the best, who's dev, who's not. And you talked about kind of breaking down barriers between the devs and the community. Are there instances you can think of where it's better to maintain some barriers between the dev and the community, or the dev and other devs, or is it just blurry in all of that?
When we say to incorporate your community, that doesn't mean that there isn't the team that's doing the development. There are people that have the final say, right? And even in like the crypto case where they get to vote and stuff like that, like they were voting between options that we gave them. There is fundamentally the core team's responsibility for the top level direction in the game. And so, yeah, don't let the community run you over, especially because, being responsive to feedback is different than listening to every single piece of feedback that you get, which is something, you can go too far in the other direction. So yeah, I would say that like, we'll relate to solo developers. The solo developer has the final say. It's their creative vision, it's their baby, and they need to decide what they're going to put in it, how it's going to work on it. But what you want to do is essentially think of it as having as many special thanks in your credit as you can possibly get. When your game rolls at the end, art by me, programming by me, music by me, special thanks, I want to see 100 names, because all those people give you that little nudge, a little idea, a little cool thing. Yeah.
What did that mission statement actually do?
The we're leveling up kind of thing? Yeah, so that's just a little snippet. We posted a very, very long description in our Discord. And again, this was something that our community knew was coming, right? So essentially the mission statement there, we're leveling up our mission. Beyond Gaming is a real-time intelligence platform for enterprises, builders, and bots. Essentially, that was our way of saying like, everything you post on social media is advertising. So what we're doing here is we're trying to let people know that we're not just doing gaming, we're moving into these other verticals, right? That's all we're trying to do here. Our community already knew this was. We'd already made a Discord announcement. We'd already made sure that everybody was on board with it. We'd already gotten our core supporters, interested. And we'd already like done a lot of research around what it would look like to do this. Our partners already knew about this, right? So this is just like our public little announcement, and we just filled it with a few lines of like the buzzwords that's going to get us the traction. So yeah, it's nothing in particular. But it is another way, again, when you're reaching out to community, we're now trying to find new people in those communities, right? Now we're saying like, hey, we're not just going to do gaming, we're going to be doing enterprise stuff, right? So that says companies connect with us, right? We're trying to build. There is a character limit on Twitter, and we didn't want to write too much. Our Discord post for our actual community and to our partners is much more plain language. I will say algorithm soup does, unfortunately, like we're just getting to the nuts and bolts of marketing here, but like it's keyword searching and algorithms. And if you're in Web3 and you write words like enterprises, you get boosted. It's just junk.
All right, one more question, I think.
Back, white shirt, go ahead.
think you'll find, or maybe you already have found in indie communities, that everyone talks to each other, everyone knows each other. And so the bad actors will out themselves and they get roundly shamed and shunned by the community. And it's a pretty easy thing to be like, this guy exploits his interns. Nobody should fucking work with him. Blacklisted.
And be that person, right? Like, be a little brave, dig into it. Like, you may end up in an asymmetrical situation at some point, but then you get to be that voice of reason that tells all your colleagues, the people that you have a good experience with and trust, hey, don't work with this person. Like, I didn't have a good experience. And then you start to build that community yourself. So, like, be the change you want to see is sort of that statement there. Cool. That's it.
That's
Thank
it.
you, everyone.
I mean,
Appreciate
we'll
you
be
coming.
around.
Yeah.